What's up, guys? I'm ArieRashelle and this is Too Deep. In this video, I want to address the question, are ghosts real? I think the best way to attack this question is by first defining the term ghost. So what's the best way to define a ghost? Well, I believe the best way to define a ghost is the soul or spirit of the dead on earth. I think that's a pretty good definition that we can all agree with. Now with that, we move on to our next question. Are ghosts in the Bible? 1 Samuel 28, 8-14 says, So Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night, and he said, Divine for me by a spirit, and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. The woman said to him, Surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death? But Saul swore to her by the Lord, As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Then the woman said, Whom shall I bring up for you? He said, Bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, Why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king said to her, Do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. He said to her, What is his appearance? And she said to him, An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and paid homage. If we continue reading, we see that Samuel not only talks to Saul, but also gave him a prophecy, which wasn't very good, was not in Saul's favor. Anyway, so Samuel was dead, but yet the Witch of Endor was able to call him up, and he was able to tell King Saul certain things. Now, we need more proof than that. So let's keep going. Isaiah 8, verse 19. And when they say to you, Inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living? So according to the Lord, the Israelites were inquiring of the dead instead of going to God. If it wasn't possible, God wouldn't tell them not to do so. He especially wouldn't be upset about it. Now, some could say that that's just the Old Testament. That doesn't have anything to do with us now, and everything changed in the New Testament. Well, let's check. Matthew 14, verse 26. Let's set the scene. It's a late night. The disciples are alone in the boat. The wind is crashing, the water against them, and Jesus comes walking on the water. So Matthew 14, verse 26. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, It is a ghost, and they cried out in fear. So Jesus is walking on the water, and the disciples think that Jesus is a ghost. So ghosts were still common when Jesus was on earth, to the point that the disciples thought he was one. So let's keep going. Luke 24, verse 37-39. This is after Jesus' death and resurrection, but the disciples don't know he's resurrected yet, so they're just chilling in the room, and Jesus just pops up out of nowhere. Literally, just boom, there. So they start freaking out. And it says this, But they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. And he said to them, Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself? Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have. Now this is the second time that the disciples thought that Jesus was a ghost or a spirit. Then Jesus clarified that spirits and ghosts don't have flesh or bones. Not once did Jesus deny the existence of ghosts or spirits, but instead clarified the difference between the living and the dead. So not once did Jesus say that ghosts didn't exist, and if his disciples were afraid of ghosts or spirits and they don't exist, wouldn't it make more sense for Jesus to ensure them that they aren't real instead of telling them that there's a difference between ghosts and people? Why would Jesus allow his disciples to continuously fear ghosts when they aren't even on the earth anymore? And it's not possible for them to be conjured up like in the Old Testament. So it seems to me as though it would be out of character for Jesus to allow his own disciples to believe in something that wasn't real. And even more so, allow them to be afraid of something that wasn't real. That's just not Jesus's nature. So if Jesus didn't deny that ghosts are real, that leads us to our next question. Can ghosts haunt people? As we discussed in our other videos, such as Sheol and what happens when you die, the dead are in one of two places, heaven or Hades. So we know that after death, we are immediately taken to one of two places. Luke 16:22, verse 23. The poor man died and was immediately carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried, and in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. So, according to Jesus, we are immediately carried to our pre-eternal destination. If that doesn't make sense, check out our video Sheol that explains in greater detail what I mean by pre-eternal destination. But just for a quick little go over, before the final judgment, we go to one of two places, heaven or Hades. But this verse specifically, they both went to Sheol, which is separated by a chasm. And I go into a lot of detail in this and in our video Sheol. But anyway, we go to one of two places immediately after death. So we know that after death, we go to one or two places, but yet we also know that it is possible to call up the dead, according to 1 Samuel 28, 8 through 14, which we read earlier, as well as Deuteronomy 18, 10 through 12. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. Now, when they were done, Samuel went back to Sheol or Hades. Just to clarify, this is before Jesus came, so both good and bad were in Sheol or Hades, which I explain again in more detail in our video Sheol. And from our video, what happens when you die, we know that the dead don't just roam the earth, but can possibly leave their current dwelling place, which we go into more detail in the video, what happens when you die. So whether it be heaven or Hades, it doesn't matter. They can still be called up and or leave their current dwellings. Now, if it's not the dead who are haunting people or places, then who or what is it? Well, 1 Samuel 16, 14 through 16. Then the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. And Saul's servants said to him, Behold, now a harmful spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful in playing the lyre, and when the harmful spirit from God is upon you, he will play it, and you will be well. Saul was being tormented by an evil spirit, not a ghost. So let's just clarify how we know this. First, it was a harmful spirit from the Lord. That means it was a spirit that was in heaven that came to torture Saul. Now we know that there were no humans in heaven at this time. It was purely spirits, angels, etc. Now how can a harmful spirit or evil spirit be in heaven? Let's look really quick at Revelation 12, 7 through 8. Now war rose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. So angels in heaven have free will. They aren't mindless robots that do whatever they're told, making them always perfect. 1 Kings 22:19 through 23. And Micaiah said, "Therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him, on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, Who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. And the Lord said to him, By what means? And he said, I will go out and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, You are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets. The Lord has declared disaster for you." So there were evil spirits in heaven. Maybe we'll talk more about evil spirits in heaven, and if this example makes God an accessory to evil below, or maybe maybe I'll take a whole nother video to address that. But the bottom line is that there were spirits that were evil and harmful that were in heaven. So let's move on. Job chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. When Job was being tormented, it was by a spirit, Satan, not a ghost. So when people or places are being haunted, it's not by someone who had unfinished business, because as we know, the rich man in Jesus' parable from Luke 16 had unfinished business, yet that didn't matter. He had to stay in Sheol or Hades. He couldn't go back to earth just because he wanted to warn his brothers. He had to stay in his pre-eternal destination. But let me know what you guys think. Do ghosts haunt people or places because of unfinished business, or is it demons or some other type of spirit? And also, do you think that ghosts are even real? Do you think that ghosts are real in our day, in our time? Let me know what you think. Until next time, God bless.